Good morning. It is Monday, September the 9th, and this is The Drill. Thank you very much. I'm Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, because I'm the only one who makes the presumption for the status quo. This as opposed to Rush Limbaugh, who's not a conservative, but a reactionary traditionalist. My podcast is about being a true conservative and using true conservatism to beat the left each and every day. My podcast is made possible by Spreaker.com. It can be heard on iTunes, Spotify, Google, and YouTube. My email address is storytimes@hotmail.com. I'm on Twitter @Ronald Hardgrove and on Facebook @The Drill. I started my socio-political odyssey as a conservative Republican. Then I became a card-carrying member of the Libertarian Party, and now I am a registered independent and true conservative. Initially, I was taught by the left how to dress, how to act, what to take seriously, and who to associate with. When I decided to vote Republican, I thought that I could have my cake and eat it too, that I could act like a liberal but vote conservative and still consider myself a conservative. I was wrong. Whenever I engaged a liberal in debate, I couldn't win. And I couldn't win in part because I couldn't be taken seriously. I talked conservative, but I acted left. I used lefty lingo, I dressed like the left, and I engaged in petty vice and associated with people who engaged in vice. People who used drugs, gambled, consorted with prostitutes, stole, and cheated. It was no wonder that the people around me didn't take me seriously. So I realized that defeating the liberals/socialists starts with getting my act together. But not only voting conservative, but by talking, dressing, and acting conservative. By refusing to associate with common criminals and ne'er-do-wells. By being aware of and resisting left-wing counterculture. By becoming a true conservative, I will not only win, I will never lose. The purpose of my broadcast is to share with my audience the lessons I have learned on how to defeat the left each and every day. On the show today, the enemy of the right is not the left, but the center. And I'm going to read from Chapter 3 from David Mamet's book, The Secret Knowledge, and I will read Chapter 1 from Christopher Lasch's book, The Culture of Narcissism, American Life in an Age of Diminishing Expectations. Thank you and welcome back. The enemy of the right is not the left, but the center. As I said before, the biggest loss suffered by the left in the last 10 years is not represented by Hillary Clinton, but by John McCain. Mr. McCain was able to be an undercover Democrat, subverting the country while pretending to be a moderate Republican. I say pretending because there's no such thing as moderate. There's no moderate position on abortion, the environment, foreign policy, war, etc. So Mr. McCain was living a lie, pretending to be a Republican when in reality he was acting like a Democrat. If you want to fight socialism, then start by confronting moderates. Persuade them to see the error of their ways and become conservative. When I come back, I'll be reading Chapter 3 from the book, The Secret Knowledge. Thank you very much. And now, Chapter 3 from The Secret Knowledge. Excuse me. Culture, school shootings, the audience, and the elevator. Culture predates society, as it evolves before consciousness. Consider, Frederick Hayek writes, an unwritten law that is universally accepted and practiced, and that both predates and gives rise to verbal codification. In a potentially violent altercation, the party nearest his opponent's home will withdraw. The culture of a country, a family, a religion, a region, is a compendium of these unwritten laws worked out over time through the preconscious adaptations of its members, through trial and error. It is, in its totality, quote, the way we do things here, unquote. It is born of the necessity of humans getting along. It does not come into being because of the inspiration, nor because of the guidance of any individual or group, but it evolves naturally. Those things which work are adopted, those which do not, discarded. This evolution has been referred to as, quote, social Darwinism, unquote. But as Hayek teaches, it is not. Darwin observed that the individuals of a species which were better fitted to their environment throve and interbred, thus strengthening their particular adaptation. Those without the effective adaptation died out. But the evolution of a culture takes place not through the disappearance of those lacking a beneficial adaptation and the interbreeding of its possessors, but through imitation. That culture which has discovered a beneficial adaptation is imitated by those cultures which perceive its worth. The possessors and non-possessors of an adaptation do not compete on this basis. All may adopt the beneficial behavior and thrive. The greatest endorsement of my grandparents' immigrant generation was, quote, he is my landsman, unquote, which was what to say, quote, he comes from my shtetl and my lodge, my culture, and I can thus predict how he will act, unquote. This is not to say that the landsman was perfect or that the prediction was infallible, but that sharing culture, one could take a large amount of energy which otherwise would have been expended on self-defense and utilize it more productively. The locker room of a jiu-jitsu academy where one may safely leave one's valuables unlocked and in the open, as the more skilled could easily overcome me or overcome the neophytes, and skill has been gained only through attendance and study, status awarded not only for physical accomplishment, but, as per the tenets of this particular tribe, for honorable behavior. The grave error of multiculturalism is the assumption that reason can modify a process which has taken place without reason, and which inputs astronomically greater than those reason might provide. Sowell, in Ethnic America, points out that the behavior of ethnic groups in America predates their immigration, or transplantation, to this country, and may be seen as growing out of the ancient necessities facing these groups in their original lands. For example, the Jews are a historically stateless people, and so had to invest their time and wealth in that which could be transported without confiscation, education. The Irish, living for centuries under foreign rule and at the whim of invaders, had to form their own hermetic state within a state to provide support, protection, and justice. Hence their introduction of and success with what became known here as ward politics. These cultural adaptations predate and are the basis for that more conscious, more sophisticated agglomeration called society, which might be said to be the appurtenances growing out of culture. Thus, as Sowell writes, the communal culture is a real possession, available to all through the efforts of all, not only in present day, but historically. This possession, as per Veblen, as above, is a little different from the individual inheritance of an actual material tool. Though it is not material, it is a tool and an inheritance. The tool of culture is the capacity to predict the operation of the social environment, a property right little different from a right in land or wealth. This cultural right exists not limitlessly, for any property right is limited by chance, death, inflation, erosion, theft, loss, confiscation, etc., but as with a material property right founded upon an abstract concept, predictability, which differs from omniscience, but is of immeasurably greater worth than ignorance. Culture exists and evolves to regulate the habit categories of interactions, the constant conscious references to which would make human interaction impossible. Let me reread that. Culture exists and evolves to relegate to habit categories of interactions, the constant conscious reference to which would make human interaction impossible. We've all experienced, for example, the phenomenon of the first night in a new home, the myriad bits of information in our possession of which we were unaware, the location and operation of the light switch, the steps to the couch, the meaning of a creak in the floor. Is it the house settling it, or is it the step of an intruder? These countless accommodations worked out over time, and without the individual's conscious knowledge, either of their content or of their presence, are, in the new home, brought to consciousness and demand energy, consideration, and response. The cultural cursor has been put back to zero, and the mind and spirit complain, quote, "I can't do all these things at once," unquote. And indeed we cannot. And the first nights in the new home are spent without sleep and longing for peace. See, the fatal conceit, the errors of socialism, to take another idea and title from Hayek, prime among which is the misconception the human mind can A, conceive, and B, implement a better way of accomplishing a process worked out over millennia by a mechanism infinitely more suited to the task than the human mind. This process being the interaction of human beings, each of whom wants something from the other, and all of whom must live together, which is to say adapt, which is to say arrive at a solution. Our current societal, as opposed to cultural, development is burdened by the presence of good ideas. These ideas are called good not because their implementation has led to a betterment of life, but in homage to the supposed goodwill or intellectual status of their instigators. Examples will come to mind based on the individual reader's political or moral complexion, but for the purposes of illustration in this essay, they may be said to include feminism, birth control, diversity, free love, and the profusion of countercultural innovations spawned in the 1960s. This joyous extemporizing of a, quote, new social vision, unquote, has brought about an effect not unlike the first night in the new home. It exacts a great cost in bringing to the conscious, unprepared and unskilled mind those decisions worked out over time. One cost is confusion. Angry feminists, lonely aging males, full divorce courts, broken families, grieving children, and a growing disbelief not only in the possibility of domestic accord, but of the efficacy of the free market. The millennia-long evolution of the human family as a means of dealing with the environment was discarded by my generation of fantasists in favor of a concept not only artificial, but inchoate, freedom, the pursuit of which has led to misery. See today's film and television love stories. They almost universally feature a man and a woman who despise each other, but come at the end of the piece to see that, nonetheless, they somehow belong together and will make a go of it. This is a sad inversion of the traditional story of a man and woman who love each other and are kept apart by, and eventually united by their ability to overcome, circumstance. That is, they are awarded happiness through the exercise of their will. The good idea, the unimplementable concept, fails, for it is the product of a consciousness incapable of recognizing, let alone assessing, possible variables. When it fails, the conscious mind balks at the necessity of spending further energy on that which was once free, which is to say, unconscious. The culture, the enlightened, socially aware individual, however, a believer in the primacy of the individual mind, now affronted by defeat, regresses to that realm which once supported but has now failed him, his unconscious, and takes revenge. He becomes angry. One might ask not why mass shootings are happening, but why they are happening in schools. Troubled youngsters from troubled families have traditionally had the possibility of solace in those institutions operating in loco parentis. The child and adolescent denied order and predictability in the home might find it on offer in the rules of the school. Learn your lesson, sit and act appropriately, dress and act appropriately, sit down, shut up. Though the child complains, these are to him a comfort, for they are predictable and they are impersonal, and so he need not, in contradistinction to the enormities of life at home, take them personally. As such, they are the perfect inculcator of respect for law, tradition, and property, without which the child can have no success in the wider, less predictable world beyond the school. If the school and its subjects, rules and regulations, and expectations are unpredictable, eventual autonomy becomes, to the young, unimaginable, and the wider world which the adolescent knows himself incapable of dealing with becomes not a phenomenon to be faced after the acquisition of skills, but an immediate and frightening exigency. School, in teaching the mastery of skills, the 3 R's, gives the child faith in his ability to master other skills. Schools devoted to the debatable social studies, multiculturalism, and other moot topics weaken the child. For, even as they seem to endorse some inchoate sense of social justice, they offer the adolescent, hungering for certainty, a curriculum of pablum, and reward him for regurgitating the school's positions. College, once a predictable, practicable course of study designed to fit the individual for self-support, has become, at least in the liberal arts, an extension of the bad high school, which is to say, of the terror of adolescence. The advertisement of choice in curriculum, in behavior, in the glorification of alternative lifestyles, while a charming idea to the conscious, pleasure-bent 18-year-old mind, is actually to him deeply unsettling. For the 18-year-old knows that at some point he must abandon even graduate school and get on in a world which he knows the pandering cry of choice is not fitting him for. Gender studies, multiculturalism, semiotics, deconstruction, video art, and other such guff, while attractive to the child as they seem to endorse his adulthood, are in truth terrifying as his clock ticks on toward the school's relaxation of its authority, that date on which it will spew the unschooled, confused, skilled-less student into a world which, he must know, is uninterested in his capacity for bourgeois and wants to know what he can contribute to the common effort. Consider college education, which in the liberal arts and in social sciences, or whatever they may be called today, is effectively a waste of money and time, and useless save as that display of leisure and wealth Veblen called conspicuous consumption. A liberal arts education is essentially a recognition symbol, which, as such, might theoretically facilitate entrance into a higher class, where entrance awarded on the basis solely of that passport. But see the MAs in English bagging groceries. Higher education is selling an illusion. What the child of the well-to-do need not matriculate into the workforce, that mastery of a fungible skill is unnecessary. It spews him eventually, even after the most attenuated graduate study, increasingly embraced by the affluent and confused, into a marketplace the lessons of which he is at a vast disadvantage to face, let alone master, having A, waited too long, and B, taught himself that he need not stoop to consider the practical. The liberal arts student has stayed too long at the fair. As the once nubile career woman finds that her marriage prospects at 45 are not the same available to her at 20 years previously, and as the middle-aged roux discovers that the possibility of domestic love and security have receded with habits formed by decades of dating and freedom. Conservative reasoning asks, what actually is the desired result of any proposed course of action? What is the likelihood of its success, and at what cost? The last, importantly, including the cost of possible failure. These are, to the social thinker, unknowable, the sum being expressed euphemistically as, quote, the law of unintended consequences. School shootings and the increased enrollment in postgraduate liberal arts studies may be seen as two unconscious attempts at adaptation of a culture evolving away from the exigencies of staffing a trained workforce. For though much has been made of the necessity of a college education, the extended study of the liberal arts actually trains one for nothing, and the terrified adolescent, abandoned by society, coddled by society, may, if unbalanced, turn to rage, and a kill, or if merely clueless, be hide in college, as he does not possess the strength to grow up and leave. Which brings me to the elevator. A group of individuals ride the elevator. And that was chapter 3 of The Secret Knowledge, written by David Mamet. There we go. And when I come back, I will be reading from chapter 1 of Christopher Lasch's book, The Culture of Narcissism, American Life in an Age of Diminishing Expectations. Thank you very much. Welcome back. And now it is chapter 1 of Christopher Lasch's book, The Culture of Narcissism, American Life in an Age of Diminishing expectation. And chapter 1 is titled The Awareness Movement and the Social Invasion of the Self. The Maravadian being is, according to Poulet, a pastless, futureless man, born anew at every instance. The instants are points which organize themselves into a line, but what is important is the instant, not the line. The Maravadian being has, in a sense, no history. Nothing follows from what has gone before. He is constantly surprised. He cannot predict his own reaction to events. He is constantly being overtaken by events. A condition of breathlessness and dazzlement surrounds him. It is only irritating to think one would like to be somewhere else. Here we are now. John Cage. And the preceding one was Donald Barthélemy. The waning of the sense of historical time. As the 20th century approaches its end, the conviction grows that many other things are ending too. Storm warnings, portents, hints of catastrophe haunt our times. The sense of an ending, which has given shape to so much 20th century literature, now pervades the popular imagination as well. The Nazi Holocaust, the threat of nuclear annihilation, the depletion of natural resources, well-founded predictions of ecological disaster have fulfilled poetic prophecy, giving concrete historical substance to the nightmare, or death wish, that avant-garde artists were the first to express. The question of whether the world will end in fire or in ice with a bang or a whimper no longer interests artists alone. Impending disaster has become an everyday concern, so commonplace and familiar that nobody any longer gives much thought to how disaster might be averted. People busy themselves instead with survival strategies, measures designed to prolong their own lives, or programs guaranteed to ensure good health and peace of mind. Those who dig bomb shelters hope to survive by surrounding themselves with the latest products of modern technology. Communards in the country adhere to an opposite plan, to free themselves from dependence on technology and thus to outlive its destruction or collapse. A visitor to a commune in North Carolina writes, quote, everyone seems to share the sense of imminent doomsday, unquote. Stuart Brand, editor of Whole Earth Catalog, reports that, quote, sales of the survival book are booming. It's one of our fastest moving items, unquote. Both strategies reflect the growing despair of changing society, even of understanding it, which also underlies the cult of expanded consciousness, health, and personal growth, so prevalent today. After the political turmoil of the 60s, Americans have retreated to purely personal preoccupations, having no hope of improving their lives in any of the ways that matter. People have convinced themselves that what matters is psychic self-improvement, getting in touch with their feelings, eating health food, taking lessons in ballet or belly dancing, immersing themselves in the wisdom of the East, jogging, learning how to relate, overcoming the fear of pleasure. Harmless in themselves, these pursuits elevated to a program and wrapped in the rhetoric of authenticity and awareness signify a retreat from politics and a repudiation of the recent past. Indeed, Americans seem to wish to forget not only the 60s, the riots, the New Left, the disruptions on college campuses, Vietnam, Watergate, and the Nixon presidency, but their entire collective past, even in the antiseptic form in which it is celebrated during the bicentennial. Woody Allen's movie Sleeper, issued in 1973, accurately caught the mood of the 70s. Appropriately cast in the form of a parody of futuristic science fiction, the film finds a great many ways to convey the message that, quote, political solutions don't work, unquote, as Allen flatly announces at one point. When asked what he believes in, Allen, having ruled out politics, religion, and science, declares, quote, I believe in sex and death, two experiences that come once in a lifetime. To live for the moment is the prevailing passion, to live for yourself, not for your predecessors or posterity. We are fast losing the sense of historical continuity, the sense of belonging to a succession of generations originating in the past and stretching into the future. It is the warning or the waning of the sense of historical time, in particular, the erosion of any strong concern for posterity, that distinguishes the spiritual crisis of the 70s from earlier outbreaks of millenarian religion, to which it bears a superficial resemblance. Many commentators have seized on this resemblance as a means of understanding the contemporary, quote, cultural revolution, unquote, ignoring the features that distinguish it from the religions of the past. A few years ago, Leslie Fiedler proclaimed a, quote, new age of faith, unquote, More recently, Tom Wolfe has interpreted the new narcissism as a, quote, third great awakening, unquote, an outbreak of orgiastic, ecstatic religiosity. Jim Hoogan, in a book that seems to present itself simultaneously as a critique and a celebration of contemporary decadence, compares the current mood to the millennialism of the waning Middle Ages. Quote, the anxieties of the Middle Ages are not much different from those of the present, unquote, he writes. Then as the now, social upheaval gave rise to, quote, millenarian sects, unquote. Both Hoogan and Wolfe inadvertently provide evidence, however, that undermines a religious interpretation of the, quote, consciousness movement, unquote. Hoogan notes that survival has become the, quote, catchword of the 70s, unquote, and, quote, collective narcissism, unquote, the dominant disposition. Since the society has no future, it makes sense to live only for the moment, to fix our eyes upon our own private performance, to become connoisseurs of our own decadence, to cultivate a transcendental self-attention. These are not the attitudes historically associated with millenarian outbreaks. 16th century Anabaptists awaited the apocalypse not with transcendental self-attention, but with ill-concealed impatience for the golden age as it was expected to inaugurate. Nor were they indifferent to the past. Ancient popular traditions of the sleeping king, the leader who would return to his people and restore a lost golden age, informed the millenarian movements of this period. The revolutionary of the Upper Rhine, anonymous author of the book of 100 chapters, declared, quote, the Germans once held the whole world in their hands, and they will do so again, and with more power than ever, unquote. He predicted that the resurrected Frederick II, Emperor of the last days, would reinstate the primitive German religion, move the capital of Christendom from Rome to Trier, abolish private property, and level distinctions between rich and poor. Such traditions, often associated with national resistance to foreign conquest, have flourished at many times and in many forms, including the Christian vision of the Last Judgment. Their egalitarian and pseudo-historical content suggests that even the most radically otherworldly religions of the past expressed a hope of social justice and a sense of continuity with earlier generations. The absence of these values characterizes the survivalist mentality of the 70s. The worldview emerging among us, writes Peter Marin, centers solely on the self and has individual survival as its sole good. In an attempt to identify the peculiar features of contemporary religiosity, Tom Wolfe himself notes that, quote, most people historically have not lived their lives as if thinking, I have only one life to live. Instead, they have lived as if they are living their ancestors' lives and their offspring's lives, unquote. These observations go very close to the heart of the matter, but they call into question his characterization of the new narcissism as a third great awakening. And that is the first part of chapter 1 of Christopher Lasch's book, The Culture of the New Narcissism. And I will be back in a minute. And thank you very much. So I have debunked the myth of the moderate, read from 2 books that have emphasized the importance of and fight for American culture and American culture's effects on American politics. These are exactly the kind of issues that could and should be covered by Rush Limbaugh, but aren't. Who are the true conservatives? They are the people that understand that conservatism is not just political, but cultural as well. They are patriotic people who use common sense. They make judgments, refuse to speculate, speak clearly and definitively, and are not afraid to say no. They are open-minded, asking why rather than why not. They are consistent, credible, and influential. Not ashamed of their existence, unafraid to learn or correct their mistakes. They are normal Americans. And that brings me to the conclusion of another episode of The Drill. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.